We've gone through, at this point, all the organ systems, specifically focusing on the endocrine system. We've talked about how these hormones are released, how they're interpreted in the body, how they're received by cells, and we've talked a lot about homeostasis, how you can use hormones to maintain the different levels of substances in your body. We're going to focus very, very narrowly on the evolution of regulatory mechanisms for water in organisms. We need to pee. That is the big thing. You can't just hold it in forever. I know sometimes, you're on those long trips and it sucks because you're like, where's the next exit? The worst part is when you're 5 minutes from home and you're like, I can make it. And then you're like, oh, I can't, I give up. The deal is, we need to conserve water. There's only a finite amount of land. There's a lot of land, a finite amount of water on land, useful water. We can't continually urinate in order to maintain levels of water, because we'll run out of water. That's what some organisms do. Literally, they're walking along peeing all the time. Usually swimming along peeing all the time, in order to maintain levels of water in their body. For us, we need to concentrate our urine. There's an issue. The issue is you need to prevent yourselves from crenating, shrinking up, or lysing due to osmosis. Different cells have different what are known as osmolarities, the level of solute in those cells. And due to the properties of water, passive transport, some water will move into the cell or out of the cell toward where the solutes are. Water always moves to where the highest level of solutes is. That's osmosis. We talked a lot about osmosis in Bio 101, probably way more than you wanted to. For animals, osmosis can be the difference between life and death. Heck, for us, we have to use osmoregulation. We use a lot of absorptive nutrition for our diet. But if you don't remember osmosis, because it was so long ago, here's a brief review. If you have a hypotonic solution, solution has a low level of solutes. That means the cell has a lot of solutes in it, and water will travel into the cell. So what will that cause the cell to do? Yeah, it swells and eventually bursts due to what's called osmotic lysing. If you were to put that cell into a hypertonic solution, the level of solute is greater outside the cell than inside. So the water will travel to the outside of the cell. So what happens to the cell? It shrinks. That's called crenation. Ideally, the cell will be in what's known as an isotonic solution, where you've got the solution is the same as the cell. So water's moving evenly in both directions. Isotonic is what organisms are striving towards. They're trying to keep their cells at the same state as the surrounding solution. Otherwise, they die. There are two ways of doing that. The organism could be what's known as an osmoconformer or an osmoregulator. An osmoconformer, these are marine organisms. What does it mean to be a marine organism? You're in the water. They change their internal osmolarity, the internal level of solutes, to match their environment. If they're in a really salty environment, they put more solutes into their own bloodstream in order to maintain that same level of osmolarity. Osmoregulators, they're a little bit more interesting. They're going to maintain their internal osmolarity regardless of the environment. And that means either taking in or excreting water in varying levels based on where they live. So osmoconformers, osmoregulators. Conformers change their internal conditions. Osmoregulators maintain their internal conditions. Saltwater organisms, those that live in the ocean, live in a very hypertonic solution. Go figure, the ocean is salty. Without osmoregulation, without any sort of control of this, their cells would crenate. They would shrivel up. So to survive, what those fish do is they drink all the time. Their mouths are open, water's literally going in, and they're drinking it. That's the opening and closing of the mouth is also to draw oxygen across the gills. But so as long as they're going along, they're taking in water. They're then going to remove the salt from the water through their gills. So a constant stream of water inside. The salt is removed through some urine and, like I said, through their gills. On the other hand, freshwater fish are often osmoregulatory. They drink fresh water hardly ever. So they go around, oftentimes, you can still see their gills moving, their mouths open and closed to draw oxygen across their gills, but they're not swallowing water. Because always water's flooding into their cells. So what they do to remove water from their cells is they're constantly peeing. It's super dilute, though. There's hardly anything in it. It's pretty much just water goes in, water goes out. It's not even water goes in. It's water gets absorbed, water gets pushed out. So saltwater fish are constantly drinking water. Freshwater fish are hardly ever, if at all, drinking water. That works really well for fish, and that kind of makes sense. Any questions on how fish work? It's those land-based organisms that have it rough. This is why life evolved in the oceans, really. It's all about regulating water. Land animals lose water all the time. I'm losing a ton of water just by talking at you because the water that I would normally be making through cellular respiration is being lost while I'm speaking outward. My throat's drying out, all sorts of things. You lose water through urination, of course, but through sweat as well. And through just plain breathing. It comes out as warm and moist. When you go and breathe onto a mirror, you see that fog. That's because of all the water coming out of you. In order to get water back in, you need to drink and eat. You guys have seen images like this before of a turtle with like a butterfly on it? You ever seen things like that? Or you see crocodiles with and alligators with a butterfly sitting on them? People are like, oh, it's artistic. Actually, the butterflies or the moths are drinking the tears from the turtle. I'm not kidding. That's literally what they're doing. So it's nice and warm and moist, and they can drink it. Yep. The more you know. Yeah, those soul-stealing butterflies. In animals, you end up with an enormous buildup of ammonia. See, your body can get rid of a lot of waste and control a lot of waste, but it can't break down proteins and nucleic acids well. When you break down a protein or you break down a nucleic acid, you build up toxic byproducts. And those toxic byproducts stop oxidative phosphorylation. We haven't talked about that this semester. When did oxidative phosphorylation happen? During what process? What? When you're making ATP, what process? It's not fermentation. Anaerobic? No other one. Aerobic cellular respiration. If you have, well, you know what it does? You do have oxidative phosphorylation and anaerobic respiration. You're right. So you stop the production of ATP when you get these levels so high. So you need to use a lot of water to flush that stuff out of the body. Use water to concentrate it and then expel it. You do. Other organisms may not need to. In order to excrete this, a lot of organisms have what are termed transport epithelia. That's kind of a, think of them as tubes, because when in doubt, the body's a series of tubes. Yeah, tubes. Next line. They connect your internal environment to the external environment. So you have these tubes that literally go from the inside to the outside. It's not in you in this way. They form a membrane that's permeable to water. Do I have? Don't have a marker. Okay, so I've got a tube. All right, so here we got a tube and a membrane. This membrane is in the middle of the tube. All right? On one side of the tube, you have the body. This is where you've got a lot of, there's water and there's blood and there's all sorts of other things you want to keep in the body, right? This membrane is going to be semi-permeable. It will allow water to get through and small waste molecules to get through, but it holds in your blood, your cells. So it acts almost like a filter in a pool. If you've ever seen one of those where you have a net that goes through the pool and lifts out leaves, it lets the water through. It lets the small solutes like chlorine through, but it doesn't allow large molecules through. The solution that's left behind is called the filtrate because it's been filtered. So the large cells, proteins, macromolecules, that's the filtrate. You've got this heavy filtrate. Useful molecules, happy ones, like water and glucose, can then be reabsorbed from the filtrate. That leaves through active transport. Active transport requires energy. And that leaves a highly, highly, highly concentrated waste behind. So you've filtered everything. You've taken the good molecules back out through active transport. You've got this concentrated waste now. Now we get to the flatworm part that I was talking about earlier. Flatworms have these tubes directly attached to the outside of their bodies, like little airlocks. They connect directly to the external environment. And that works because they live in water. They don't need to conserve anything. If they run out of water, they can always pull it back. Insects, though, they live on land. So they need to get their filtrate passed into their digestive system where the solutes and water get reabsorbed. You have to pull water out of that filtrate so that you can hold it in the body. So when insects excrete waste, it's going to be almost a solid pellet. You want to remove as much water as possible. In vertebrates, though, we have the kidney. The kidney's job is primarily osmoregulation, making sure that water levels and the level of solutes in the bloodstream are maintained. The kidney itself is actually made up of those tubules, with those membranes, which means that it's allowing for certain molecules through and not others, creating a super concentrated filtrate of waste. They concentrate urine up to about 4 times the osmolarity of blood through filtration. It really is concentrating that waste product. The more concentrated the waste, the higher level of water conservation you have. You've got to maintain water in your body. In fact, one of the worst conditions to have, one of the most deadly, is diarrhea. Why? Because you are removing a ton of water from your body at a time. Granted, one of the for lack of a better word, the simplest, the easiest ways of surviving diarrhea, and this is, for us, it's just a minor inconvenience, but for our ancestors, just 2 generations ago, it was absolutely, maybe 3 generations ago, it was deadly. It's simply, make sure to keep getting fluids back into your body. And that's where all those old adages about when you're sick, keep drinking fluids. And you hear that all the time still, right? It is, honest to goodness, super important because your kidney can only process so much. And if you are getting rid of water faster than you're taking it in, you die. So once you get that highly filtered concentrate, it's going to get pumped to the bladder. And we talked about the bladder before, little golf ball thing. It passes from the kidney to the bladder, and it's going to be held in the bladder until the bladder's full, and you have a release.